An attorney and longtime community advocate, Assemblyman Sean Ryan was first elected to represent New York's 149th Assembly District in 2011. As an assemblyman, Sean has championed many different issues, including reform of our state's industrial development agencies, increased investment in education, waterfront development, neighborhood redevelopment on Buffalo's west side, clean water, and environmental protection, and led the effort to create a pedestrian-friendly, neighborhood-focused plan for the redesign of the Scajaquada Expressway. Sean is also a high road builder and a high road parent, the proud parent of Kate Ryan, who was a 2017 high roader. So thank you to Assemblymember Ryan for being here today and for your support of the high road.
Good morning, everybody. I know we've been here for a little while. I love dealing with the Cornell high road folks. It's tremendous. It gives me great optimism after meeting high roaders over the summer, having chats with them over the last few years, exactly where we're going to go in our country. There's certainly a lot of reasons to be despondent these days, but after I interact with high roaders and folks from college, I always feel a little bit better about our future. So as you all know, you're the 10th anniversary class of the high road program, and City of Buffalo loves the high roaders. We love the introduction of new ideas, new ways of thinking into our community, and we think of each and every one of you as an ambassador, that we're going to bring you here for the summer, we're going to indoctrinate you on the great things about Buffalo, and no matter where you go in your life, you're going to have stuck in your head about your good experience here, but also your good experience with public service. So Lou Jean, congratulations on the 10th year of this program. Megan, it's always fantastic to work with you. And Zoe, who's from the Cornell lobbying arm in Albany, always great to work with the larger Cornell family. So I want to just talk to you generally about the concepts of economic development and about economic justice. So first, let's just talk about economic development. So somewhere in the 80s, the relationship between government and the private sector fundamentally changed. So government at one point set the conditions for economic growth. We took care of parks, we took care of infrastructure, we took care of schools. And during that time, there was this mantra from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Here's the mantra: keep business out of politics and politics out of business. But boy, has that changed. We went from a country of rugged entrepreneurialism and individualism to, it seems, nobody wants to launch a private venture without taxpayer support. So as much as we talk about ourselves as a capitalistic country, we offer supports for businesses at an amazing level. And a friend of mine likes to say we like to socialize the risk, but privatize the profits. So it's now accepted and normalized for the government to be a player in private companies and private ventures. We give money directly to private companies. It's often just direct infusion of taxpayer money. And sometimes we have a complicated system of subsidies, sometimes shrouded by lack of transparency. But all the same, it's a direct funnel of taxpayer money into the private industry. Now, this is happening at the same time that we've engaged in about a 2 or 3 generation austerity budget in the United States. So we're not growing our social welfare programs. We talk about things like Social Security as in the pejorative of being entitlements. Taxes on corporations, taxes on the wealthy, taxes on estates have all gone down. So at the same time as we're cutting all those taxes, we're saying why we can't afford basic safety net programs anymore. So there really is a shifting of resources from money that used to go to safety net programs are now going straight into the hands of private corporations. So it's just interesting that you have to keep in mind how much this has changed, but it also permeates every level of government. So in cities and towns, they give tax subsidies to businesses or to developers. So that's often just a city tax break. On the county levels, counties have industrial development agencies where they'll do things like if you build $1 million building, you don't have to pay sales tax on all your materials. So 8.5% off the top is not coming into the kitty, but it's going directly to the developer. They do things called pilots for property taxes. So for a period of time, you will not have to pay property tax on your new building. And on the state level, we have an amazing array of subsidy programs where we will give, as I said before, a direct subsidy to company X. We will provide a job training subsidy. We will give a tax abatement subsidy. You name it, there's a subsidy. Now, in the federal level, the big fights there are less about subsidies and more about the tax structure, essentially who pays and who doesn't, combined with often fights about federal contracts of which private company will be able to get the contract often to do a public service. Just most recently, we've, of course, all heard about the child separation policies going on, but there is a corporate beneficiary to all those policies. So in many of the instances, the federal government's contracting with private companies to do this work, who are, of course, profit-motivated companies. But that's everywhere. But guess what? With all these levels of subsidies we have, they don't work. There's been no empirical economic study of saying how these programs actually foster economic development. They don't, but they certainly make it so that we're giving a lot of money away. So I like to say that the comparison is always NFL teams. So the NFL has a product in the city of Baltimore has a football team. The city of Indianapolis wants that football team. So they sort of trade the team on the public market. So we're going to get a team in Indianapolis. Well, we're going to have to pay them $1 billion to come to our town to build our stadium. But that sort of model of how corporations work has shifted from just NFL teams to almost every corporation you can think of. I mean, think of Amazon's bid. Who would like to host my company? But it's going to cost you billions of dollars to host my company, and we're not going to pay any taxes. That is just, to me, so anathema to what we believe in, sort of this country ruled by the principles of supply and demand and business institutions free of regulatory and free of government influence. So if you believe in this system, which isn't empirically proven, there's ways to do it better. There's often on these contracts with private companies, there's no quid pro quo. It's we'll give you the money, you'll come to my city, but there's often no obligation of that company to stay in the municipality any period of time. There's often not a contractual obligation to produce a number of jobs. Often you have job targets, but it's not a deal where if I've given you $100 million, that if you don't hit the targets, you got to give the money back. And most shockingly, there is almost never any obligation to produce jobs that pay a certain amount of money. So often municipalities end up subsidizing companies that come in who pay a wage rate that's actually under the average wage in that community, which would really make you scratch your head of why we are prioritizing this as a social good. So if we're going to keep this type of system in place, we need to have good clawback languages. We need to do better underwriting on companies, and we need to make sure that there is a lasting economic legacy. There's example after example of companies leaving a locality as soon as their tax breaks expire. I got an 8-year tax break, a 10-year tax break, and on the anniversary of that tax break, they're either asking to have it re-upped or threatening to leave. And in many cases, they don't even talk to the host municipality anymore because somebody else already offered them a better deal. So, as the clock ticks to midnight on January 1st, there's moving vans in front of the company because they're going, in many cases, just one county over to renew their tax subsidies. So you've got a whole industry set up around it, whether it's law firms and accounting firms, to make a company realize that they can maximize profits not by producing a better project or a better product or doing better R&D, but by just getting a better tax subsidy. That's not exactly what we're looking for in America. But the other way to do it is having government do what they traditionally did when we created strong economies. So if you look at the Western New York economy when it was at its post-war strongest, no subsidy was given to General Motors Company to come here to make engines. No subsidy was given to the Ford Motor Company. No subsidy was given to Dow Chemical. No subsidy was given to any of our large legacies companies, and that's what built a strong economy. Those companies came to Western New York because we had invested in our infrastructure. We had systems of roads, of rails, of deep water ports, all that were conducive to companies. We invested in parks, places that made your community a better amenity. Because what did they look at when they came in? They wanted to make sure that there was nice places for at least their mobile executives to work. We invested in science and discovery by funding our universities, which had a ripple effect back into those industries. We invested in our primary, our elementary school, and we invested in culturals and the arts. Even today, when corporations are doing relocations, as they call them, they send out big checkoff lists. And all over those checkoff lists are asking questions about your arts, your culturals, and your parks. They're not asking about your tax subsidy and your tax rates. So we're sort of in the game, but we're playing it the wrong way, and the taxpayers are taking it on the chin. We could also change rules of how we allow the transfer of companies. Certainly the corporate culture that's developed among startups now is sort of a cash-out culture, where you want to develop a business, you want to get to a certain point, and then sell it for maximum profit and get out. Unlike the old system of, I started a company, I want to tend this and make it go for years. So one of the changes we can make on the state level is trying to deal with how we do employee-owned businesses. The federal government has a really good ESOP program, employee stock ownership programs. It's a good program. It's highly complex, and it's really aimed at larger companies. But we need to simplify those rules and let it apply to the local level. And I'll give you an example of how this would work in a better system. We had a company here that was a multi-generational meat processor. They made lunch meats. They employed hundreds of people, all Teamsters, so that means jobs with good benefits, good wages. The owner of the company didn't want to be in the business anymore, so he put it up for sale. Got a great offering from a multinational, Tyson Foods. But it was clear not long after Tyson bought it, they really just bought it to close it because they didn't want another sorts of competition. So over a multi-year period, they just phased it out. But the better economic virtuous cycle you would like to happen is to have the employees of that company being able to pool their resources to buy that company to keep that capital that was invested over a multi-generational period in our community within our economic biosphere. So we need to make sure that we change our rules, but also if we're going to incentivize anything, we should incentivize employee ownership, especially the more capital can flow easier, you want to make it so it's not flowing out of your community at a great rate. We have one very large employee-owned company in Buffalo that makes orthodontics equipment. If anyone ever wore a retainer, they'll take an X-ray and they'll take a picture of that. And then the locally owned company that's owned by the employees is actually the one that makes that. So they'll receive a transmission of this, and the people at this company will actually model it, make it, and they'll sit at workbenches to do the finishing products, adjust it, then they'll send it back to your dentist, in Minnesota or Minneapolis. That company is an employee-owned company, and it's not sort of what you might think of like a large company. Everyone doesn't sit around and make communal decision makers with 300 employees. The employees get together every year. They hire a CEO. They give that CEO authority, and it runs just like a regular company. But that company has received buyout offers over the years. But the buyout offer always ended up with a lot of cash coming into the company, but then the company closing and the jobs disappearing. So individual stockholders would have said, great, I'm going to make a big return this year on my investment. But the employees are the stockholders, so they all said, well, I'll make a big return on my investment, but I won't have a job ever again. So they, of course, did the same economic thing and said, no, I'm not looking for a one shot. I want to keep this going. So we need to develop programs and policies to make sure that we can keep capital in communities, especially as companies are selling at a very high rate. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was equity in the economy and the difference between fairness and equity. In America, we often get caught up on this concept of fairness. A fairness doctrine says every kid in New York State gets a free public education. It's fair. If you're 5, you get to go to kindergarten. But is that an equitable system? It hasn't proven to be an equitable system. So people from the suburbs, our school systems are based on a property tax formula. The more your house is worth, the more money that's going to come into your system. So we have this fair system where everyone gets an education, but it's not equity. Everyone's not getting the same thing. So we need to keep that in mind when we talk about building an equitable economy. It's not the same as a fair economy. And I think more now than ever, we need to have an open conversation about bias and racism that's both structural and unconscious, and how it affects all areas of our community. Because whether you believe in a just society because you believe in human rights, or whether you want a strong economy, it's inarguable that an unjust economy is a bad economic formula. Sidelining huge portions of your economy is not good for an economy. The national problems have almost raised this question, and maybe we can have some productivity come out of some of the things that are happening on the national stage, but certainly to have this open and honest conversation. I'm going to just touch on what I think are an example of structural bias and then also unconscious bias. So an example, I believe, of structural bias is a lot of municipalities have residency requirements. And you think about it, it makes sense on some level. If you're the town of X, the town taxpayers pay the money, and we want to make sure that our teachers, our sanitation people, our volunteer firefighters, all live with our community because that's sort of our community. But sounds fair, right? But it doesn't produce an equitable system often, because the suburban development in New York State really matched the white flight leaving cities. And we had laws in place that made it so people of the minority groups weren't even eligible to buy houses in those communities. The great movement of people out of cities after World War II were funded by government subsidized loans. And right in those loan documents said this loan cannot be used in any way that would cause racial disharmony. So as the suburbs were growing, they were growing based on a structural racism that was built right in. So if you transport that today, you have a great divide of mostly homogeneous suburban communities that became homogeneous as a result of unfair and unjust federal and state economic policies. But so today, if you fast forward, we have a town that says you have to live in the town to be a teacher. Well, for generations, that town was made based on exclusionary rules. So it makes you sort of scratch your head and say, well, these towns get all sorts of state grants to do projects. They get federal grants to do projects. Local county money goes to these towns. But underlying this is the towns itself are a reflection of a deep structural bias and structural racism. So the very thought of a town that has 98% maybe white population then has a residency requirement, and then you go pull out who works in the town, and the whole town might not have a minority employee. So I think we have to look at things a little bit differently and scratch a little bit deeper to say what is the impact of some of these policies. So that's a structural problem. And I think the implicit problem is just as deep. And something that really is stuck in my brain the last few years is a group did a study where they put in fake resumes to computer job systems. So one resume had a name that was designed to sound obviously African American, and one resume had a name that was designed to signal Caucasian American. And the results were shocking. Head-to-head, same qualifications on the resume. Somehow Caucasian American got called back for the next step of the procedure. Then the social scientists tinkered even more. They made it so that the Caucasian job applicant didn't complete high school, and the African American did. Somehow the Caucasian got called back more. Then they went one step farther, and they had the Caucasian job applicant with a prison record and the African American candidate with all the right qualifications. Guess who still got called back more? So it's a system of implicit bias where if you took any of the people who were in that decision-making process, put their hand on the Bible, swore them into deposition, they will tell you that none of the decisions that they made looking at those resumes was driven by racism in any way. but it's so deeply ingrained in how we do things. So tie this back to economic development. So as we're trying to build our new Buffalo, our better Buffalo, we need to build the economy that's free of a lot of the implicit biases that have created the economy as it exists now. So Buffalo is a very integrated city, but if you take any of the 10 largest employers in the city of Buffalo who are located in the city of Buffalo and got demographic information out of those companies, guess what? The demographics will not reflect the city of Buffalo. And I've had long conversations with the people who do their human resources and development to sort of ask how we got to this point. And they'll come back to this fairness argument of, look, it was just these resumes and it was a very fair process. But there's this massive blind spot. So I like sort of what some of the tech companies are doing now. They're setting up a system where computers are actually doing the first round screening, where they won't look at the two names and draw all sorts of biased conclusions. But we, as a city, in order to further ingratiate our economy, we need to make direct linkages, this is where the government can come in, between HR policies and how we attract people into your company, and then the hiring practice yourself. So, I'm continuing to meet with people in the business community to say, you need to develop a system where you put out exactly what you're looking for in job qualifications, and then let us provide people who meet those qualifications. Because you'll just be amazed at the reasons that you hear over and over again why a company can't be diverse. Don't leave thinking that it's somehow just a problem of poverty. It doesn't get better with college degrees. It doesn't get better with a master's degree. The spread gets even more distinct. But these things aren't going away unless folks like you with fresh brains who think of things a little bit differently have an open conversation about it and tackle these problems. Because certainly how we're addressing it now, it isn't working. So we need to think about it a little bit differently. And so, why do we wind this into a conversation about economic development? Of course, for all the obvious reasons that we want to build a just community, but also as the government and the taxpayers are spending more of their money subsidizing companies, we have to demand more back from them. And whether it's equal hiring practices or clawbacks, it's all got to be same part of the package. So we can't ignore this part of it. And we spend a lot of money in New York State promoting economic development, and generally we don't get good results. And in a city like Buffalo, if we don't start getting better results, we will build a stronger economy here, but it'll an economy that benefits the people that the current economy benefits. But I think you can't build the Buffalo we want in any real economic sense if we leave a lot of people on the economic sidelines. It's just not possible.